Good evening, 12s, and welcome to the Seahawks 360 podcast, where we look at the Seahawks from every angle every week. I'm Candace Higgins,
I'm Tino Ganasius.
and we are back post Super Bowl to talk about the Seahawks, where things are with the team, and everything in the middle. So,
Mm-hmm.
Tino's bearing through, gutting it out for us. Sick, appreciate you hopping on with us,
Yeah,
Tino.
for sure.
Always a good time for sure. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess we'll just spend a couple minutes, talking about the Super Bowl before we get into all the things that are Seahawks related. I know for me, my number one takeaway was just that it was nice to see that without having that top five quarterback or that like elite quarterback, that you can still win it all, right? And if you're the Seahawks and you are trying to build a team around Geno, which we talk about later, but it seems like they are doing,
Mm-hmm.
that's a big deal. To see another team do it and actually win it and beat Patrick Mahomes when it was seeming like he was basically becoming unbeatable.
Yeah.
But what say you?
Well, we were laughing off stage prior to recording here about literally the first thing you said was the thing about winning the Super Bowl without a top five quarterback, and my question to you was, is he a top five? Is he not a top five quarterback? And we immediately started debating, of course, because that's what we do. But my answer to your question is no. I don't. Jalen Hurts is top 10 for me, and I think he's the type of quarterback who, in the right system with the right surrounding pieces, can be very, very, very good, right? So, from a performance standpoint, I might put him in the top five last year, but it's not because you have Jalen Hurts. It's because you have an offensive line that was by far the best in football, right? You got a Hall of Fame right tackle in Lane Johnson. You got Mariota on the left side, who is 380 pounds and 6'8" and can run, no exaggeration, and can run like the wind. You've got AJ Brown, who's a clear cut number one running back, right? You've got this defense that's playing phenomenal football all year long. So in order to win with Jalen Hurts, or to make it a Seahawks thing, in order to win with Geno Smith, you'd better be amazing at every single other position, right? And so Geno would be great if he had a great offensive line, as we've been saying. But until you get to that point, I think it is difficult to win with the quarterback that's not elite. You have to have everything else perfect in order to do it. That's my takeaway.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, and that's really I think what brings us to everything being relevant in the off season because
Mm-hmm.
um, coaching matters with that. The players matter with that, and so in my opinion, since it seems like the Seahawks are leaning towards this team can still compete and we are closer to contention than we are rebuilding,
Mm-hmm.
that's then what their goal is. But it makes this off season critical, right? In terms of the decisions they make, personnel wise, in terms of the extensions that they make, in terms of how they navigate the cap space. They, in my opinion, they don't have a lot of room for error because this team was 10-7 last
Mm-hmm.
season and still missed the playoffs. They have got to take a step forward, and I would dare say that not only do they need to get in the playoffs in order to progress this thing forward, they need to win a playoff game. Like they still need to
Mm-hmm.
be on the same trajectory had they just made the playoffs this past season. So
Mm-hmm.
they're frankly under a lot of pressure. John Snyder's under a lot of pressure. We'll talk about some of those things a little bit more in detail here in a minute. But we'll pick back up where we left off in our last episode, and that was talking about Klint Kubiak, who you hated. Well, okay, you didn't hate it.
Still
That's not
do.
a fair
Still
assessment.
do.
You That's
Still
not a
do.
fair assessment, but you felt like the selection was boring.
Mm-hmm.
And he is a boring dude. For sure.
Way to
But I
quote.
remember
Way to quotes.
yeah, he's a boring guy, no question about it. But there were some clips that that sort of some things that sort of stood out to me, some takeaways. I sort of wanted to go through those things because a couple interviews have happened since we last spoke. Klint Kubiak did his introduction press conference, did an
Mm-hmm.
interview on Bumpin' Stacy on Seattle 710. And then also John Schneider started back up with the John Schneider show where he meets with Bob and Wyman, Dave and Wyman, Dave Wyman and Bob. You know what I'm saying.
Well,
Um, he's on 710
mhm,
with Wanda and Bob. That's what I'm looking for.
mhm,
And he does. I think that's going to be a series. I believe it's like goes through the draft and it pretty much wrap up around that time. So it's always interesting to get John's insights as well. In this one particular, he started off with a banger, if you will, amongst the
mhm,
Seahawks fan base
mhm.
for sure. So we'll get into all those things. But Tino, sort of wanted to get your initial impressions on the overall, everything that you've heard, all the information that you've consumed. I think we've hired some additional coaches. So any
Mhm.
thoughts on that? Just kind of any general thoughts on some of the moves that have happened or things that have come out since we last spoke.
So the John Schneider thing, he talked, and I know we'll listen to the clip here. He talked about his approach to the offensive line, specifically, this offseason. And, I think his people reacted to the fact that he was saying, talking mostly about resources, right? And how much resources to put into a particular place. And my initial thought is, well, I want you to put every resource we have in the offensive line because it's such a glaring hole, right? It's like needs 1, 2, and 3 on this team.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my initial reaction in hearing him kind of, essentially saying to the Seahawks fan base, we're not going to invest everything into the offensive line, even though that's what I would love to see. But as I thought about it more, you know, there's not a ton of money to spend, right? Cap wise. The Seahawks aren't flush. And I think that's something that he knows. And so if the fan base is expecting a Trey Smith, which I would love, you know, it doesn't mean like if he doesn't have the money to spend to do it and he can't actually be in that bidding, he's going to have an irate fan base, even though he doesn't have the resources to actually go do it. And I think by saying what he did, he set up the team to not have to necessarily spend a ton of money in free agency. That doesn't mean he's not going to use draft resources to do it. But I think the free agent route is something that he was guarding against a little bit with his quote. I honestly, in thinking about it, I think it was a smart thing to say because you come out and say you're going to spend a bunch of money on free agents on the offensive line, and then they don't want to come here. All of a sudden, you look like you're not doing your job. So he's setting those expectations super low, and hopefully he's going to try to exceed them. That's my optimistic take on what he said. I think it's very easy to go the other way. I'll say that. We can start with that one. We'll get to your boy
Yeah,
Klint in a
yeah. I
minute.
was gonna say yeah. Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead. I'll go ahead and play that clip for you
Mm-hmm.
guys.
And so I would say yes to answer your question. Every position changes every year based on depth, but the offensive line is always there's always like this dearth of talent at the position. So supply and demand, right? So yeah, but there's everybody's when you talk to other teams, when you talk to other GMs about trades and stuff like that, or our guys upstairs talking to other teams, every kind of like skips the offensive line because it's like just a given. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
everybody's looking for him. You know what I mean? So, and yeah. So, but it shifts. Some years there'll be better runners, some years better corners, some years there's better receivers, and it just depends. And you're putting, your team. We can't do anything unless we know exactly what our team looks like, and then B free agency. And then in free agency, it's also casualty guys too that we're projecting
Right.
that may be released, and then obviously the draft is the biggest portion.
My dad always
Because free
says,
agency is not like you can't just throw money at something to fix it or to fix
Yeah.
a perceived need. That's we've made mistakes there in the past, and we're not going to repeat. We're going to try not to repeat the mistakes we've made, and so.
So let me say something real quick. I pull up the top 50 free agents according to ESPN, which you can take it or leave it, ESPN, but we want the names, right?
Right.
Trey Smith, number 2 free agent. He's a guard for Kansas City. Kansas City does not want to lose him. He's might be the best guard in football at this point. Free agent. Ronnie Stanley, former first round pick, left tackle, Baltimore Ravens. Free agent. You keep going down. You've got hold on here. Cam Robinson, number 15, offensive tackle, Los Angeles Rams. You've got Will Fries, Indianapolis Colts. He's a guard. Zach Martin, he's old, but a Hall of Fame guard with the Cowboys. You keep going down. It's Drew Dalman, center, right? You've got Mekhi Becton, right? Top 6 pick, I believe, or maybe top 5 pick of the Jets as a right tackle, played guard on the Super Bowl winning Eagles team. My point is the talent is there, right? This is more, he's trying to steer, I think, the conversation in a certain direction because there's also good linemen in this upcoming draft. You see linemen being mocked to the Seahawks all the time. There are good linemen. It's a matter of does he have and does he want to spend the resources, in my mind. And he's setting us up to not spend the resources, which is unfortunate. I've been a John Schneider apologist forever, right? I believe in him, or I believed in him. If he doesn't spend a bunch of resources on this offensive line this offseason, bring in somebody else because uh, 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 it's need 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 on this team, right? You left everything else at every other position the same, but you fixed the offensive line, and this is a potential Super Bowl team. So to me, it's malpractice if he doesn't push a bunch of resources towards it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I surely hope he's doing what you said, and that is sort of trying to lower expectations to ultimately meet the bar. And even if he doesn't go for the highest, Trey Smith, right? I think even if
Mm-hmm.
he's not going for the best free agent out there on the market, I think, like you said, there's enough depth in this free agent class
Yep.
that you can still make some valuable pickups.
Mm-hmm.
You can do so much better than a Lincoln Tomlinson
Right.
this year. You
Right.
have the opportunity to do better than that. You can get a mid tier guy.
Yep.
There are mid-tier options, particularly. I didn't get the clip to talk about today, but Klint Kubiak talked about how important that center position is for him and how he is looking for someone elite at that position. And that is no offense to Olu, in my opinion, but I do not consider him an elite um, center. And
Below average. He's
yeah,
below
I
average.
mean, he's all right, right? Like, he's all right. Like, he held up, right?
Right.
But that was relative to what was an absolute trash can on either side of him. And so,
Right.
like, it was in relation to that.
Right.
Um, if you really want to truly build this team out the right way, you've got to be elite somewhere. And so, we talked about this in the middle of the season. I can't remember what week we were in, but we just kind of talking about strategy. And one thing I mentioned was that it might be cheaper to get an elite center and
Yep.
then to draft your guards and try to hope that you can develop them.
Sure.
It's my hope that they're going that route. Um, I think that route could be successful, particularly because with Clint Kubiak's system, he's emphasized the importance of the center. But like you said,
Right.
if they're just going to run this thing back and draft a couple more
Mm.
guys,
Mm-mm.
at some point you got to do something different. They have yet to prove that they can draft and develop. So continuing to go along that strategy when it's not worked in 15 years now at this point we're approaching, I think is, like you said, bordering malpractice. If John cannot improve this offensive line, I would say pretty dramatically in terms of, I'm going to be looking at process.
Right.
Um, more than results for me. I'm typically, I tend to skew looking at the process more in general anyway than results. But like you said, how is he allocating these resources when I'm evaluating if I want John Snyder to continue to be the GM of this team?
Right.
He's got to do something different. Um,
Well, and you've got like so you've got I saw like Kevin Zeitler, right? Kevin Zeitler has been a probably top 10 guard
mhm,
off and on for 10 years
yeah,
or 8 years, however long he's been in the league. He's been really, really, really good. And he was with Cleveland. I think he was with Detroit for a time. But he's been a top, I think it was he in Baltimore maybe, but a very, very good guard, right? A very good offensive guard. He's he's post peak to a certain extent. But if you or a Zach Martin, you bring in someone who knows how to play,
right.
you bring in young talent next to him, you may invest a third round pick in a guard. You think it like a Christian Haynes, but the Christian Haynes process.
Hmm.
But you put him next to or with a Kevin Zeitler or a Zach Martin, and you tell them to learn from this older player, and you tell the older player you're going to be a mentor to our young guards, right? Then you have a setup where you can solve the problem now because you can still get a year or two out of these guys who are post peak, and you're teaching somebody else. There has to be a culture of coaching and a culture of teaching and mentorship on this line. It's what it needs, right? It's what Scott Huff did not give it. So I have that would be my ultimate kind of solution is to have it be multi-tiered or multi-layered as
Yep.
far as solving the offensive line. But I will also say that you have to continue to, even though we haven't developed homegrown right offensive linemen in a long time, it's like to me the same thing as defensive line and the same thing as quarterback to a certain extent, running back even. You have to continue to draft them over and over and over again, even if you think it's not a need. Continue to invest resources in that position because you're going to need them. The other part is if it's coaching, we're going to bring in yet another coach, right, on the offensive line. And I think that just because we didn't do it in the past doesn't mean that the new coach can't do it in the future. You have to continue to push and continue to try. As I said, I push all my chips into that offensive line pot and try to rebuild that because that's where we need it. I did not like his comments. We'll put it that way. I did not like his comments.
Yeah, no, I really didn't. They make me nervous because overall, like you said, I like John. I
Mhm.
think you can do a heck of a lot worse than John
Yes.
Schneider. That's not to say that he hasn't had misses, but every GM has misses. And so every GM has something that they really mess up on. But what makes
Mhm.
them good and what keeps them at their job is that they have good moves and good things after that. I really don't people are really upset with John Snyder for how things went on the team and how many free agents that he did absolutely set that free agent budget on fire
Right.
last season, no question. But I will give him a pass because of the circumstances with getting to know a new coach, getting to understand what they want for the scheme, and how those when they did make the moves in the middle of the season, they worked right. And so I'm willing to give them credit of just a learning curve in personnel with a new coaching staff. And John is I mean, this is new for John too. He's been with Pete, his entire not his entire
A
career, but
long time.
for the bulk for the vast
The bulk of
majority.
his GM career, other than this 1 year with McDonald, right? He didn't. He came in from Green Bay, and he wasn't. I don't. Was he a GM in Green Bay
I think
when
he
he
was an
came? I don't
executive of
remember.
some kind. I don't think he was the head honcho from
Mm-mm.
what I understand. I can't remember what his title was, but
Right.
he seemed to be very intricately involved with things, but I don't think he had official GM manager like general manager title.
Right. If we can rewind to the Super Bowl real quick,
Yeah.
I think there are two ways to build a winning team in the NFL at right now. One is you have such an elite quarterback, like a Mahomes, like an Allen, right? Like a Lamar Jackson, even, who they transcend everything else. You can give them, it's what the Patriots did with Brady, right? That you can give them okay receivers. You can give them an okay offensive line. And they are so dominant that they don't need to be perfect at those positions, right? So you can push resources elsewhere or afford to pay Mahomes $55 million.
Hmm.
Or you've got the model of a quarterback who is good but not great, doesn't make mistakes, right? And but is still very good, right? Is still top 12, top 10, maybe top 8.
Hmm.
But you have to be perfect on both sides of the line of scrimmage. You have to be perfect on the line. You look at what Philadelphia is doing, and they've got a dominant offensive line. Barkley is great. Saquon Barkley is phenomenal. Best running back in football last year.
Yep.
But how much of that was going from the Giants offensive line to the Eagles offensive line? A
Yeah.
ton of it,
A
right?
lot.
A ton of it. Look at their defense. Jordan Davis, right? 350, 360-pound defensive tackle out of Georgia. They pick Walker, another 320, 325 offensive or defensive tackle that is an incredible three technique, probably the most dominant defensive tackle in football already in year two, right? You got Cooper DeJean playing corner. He was awesome. Their linebackers are awesome. Josh Sweat was phenomenal. Nolan Smith. All the front seven on that team is freaking dominant. The offensive line dominant. That's why they were so good, right? It's not a puzzle that has to be solved. Look at Cincinnati knows now their offensive line has to be better. Joe Burrow has to be upright, but you can win a Super Bowl with Joe Burrow.
Yep.
You watch what the I almost said the I did not almost said the wrong mascot. The Commanders. What do you think they're going to draft? What do you think they're going to do in this upcoming draft? They're going to do everything in their power to protect Jaden Daniels.
Yep.
So to me, if we're sitting on what I consider to be a top 10, top 12 quarterback in Geno Smith for the next 3 years, you don't have that Patrick Mahomes. You have to fortify both sides of the line of scrimmage. You have to give some reinforcements to that D line, and you have to invest heavily in the offensive line. When I say invest heavily, it's picks and money, right? But to me, the solution is clear. Doesn't mean you're going to hit on the right guys, but that's where you got to go.
Yep. And they need blue chippers at this
Yep.
point.
Yep.
That's what this team is missing. That's the difference between outside of the offensive line.
I
That's
agree.
the key difference between the Eagles and the Seahawks.
Mm-hmm.
It's blue chip talent, difference makers at the position. And even if you have like I mentioned, even if you have an elite center, right, you need someone who is elite. Um, at least I would say five positions, like at least five or six. Like you want some genuine difference makers on both sides of the ball, and
Right.
you want a few of them, guys that teams really have to game plan. They can only game plan so much for. Now Leo Williams, I think, took a step forward in that regard, and so I don't
I'm
know if
not
he
so
can keep
worried
that
about the
up.
defense. The defense has blue chippers to me, right?
You need it on both sides.
And I
You need it,
think
you
right.
need it
Well,
on
I was
both
gonna.
sides.
My question for you is, how many blue chippers are on the offensive side? In your opinion, how many?
You could argue DK. You could argue now teams. Okay, I will give DK that because teams still treat him,
Yep.
even though his like production doesn't necessarily equal the gravity that he gets. Frankly,
Sure.
the teams still treat him and they game plan for him in a way that I think still makes him count. Right,
Sure.
to in the spirit of what I'm looking for.
Okay.
And then JSN might be. Now he's got to repeat it again, another season. But I do think JSN is on that trajectory for sure. I mean, he had the better production of between he and DK anyway. Teams are going to, I think, based on his last year, adjust a little bit for how they game plan for JSN.
Any
I
more?
think. Uh, I can't put Gino in that category. I love to, but I don't think he's the guy who can take your good supporting cast and make it great.
Right.
But he's not the guy that can be a top five elite over the top. So no, you don't have that at the quarterback position. We know where the offensive line stands at, and then we talked about our tight end room and how sad looking that is right now.
Right.
Now I don't think that's hard to overhaul, but um,
See, I'm at one. I'm at one. DK
who
is
you
the
got?
only one for me. And DK, I think you're right, because if there was a great, say there was another big threat on the other side, or we had a great tight end, right? Like say there's a Bowers type at tight end.
Right.
When DK got more single coverage, I think you'd see DK put up 1,400 yards and 15 touchdowns with single coverage.
Yeah.
He just doesn't get single coverage,
Mm-mm.
right? But you still have to roll your safety over to him all the time. You can't play, and you certainly can't play zero coverage. You certainly can't have no safeties against him because he will eat you up every time, right?
Right.
So DK to me is elite. He belongs in that class. Whether his numbers reflect it or not doesn't matter to me. JSN, I think if it was a bunch of JSNs out there, or JSN didn't play opposite of DK, I wonder what his production would truly look like. Because
Sure.
I think he's good and polished. I don't think he's great. I don't think he's elite. And I think he's good at what he does, but what he does is not as valuable, I think, to an offense as what DK does. And I also think what JSN does is easier to find than what DK does. So, I like JSN. I'm glad he's on our team. I don't see him as an elite player. And yeah, you go down the board with the rest of this offense. I don't think K9 is. He might be talent wise. He's not from a health standpoint. Um, and Gino, I think, is. I love Gino. And I think Gino will put up some huge numbers if he's given an offensive line, but I don't see him as an elite talent. And so I think you're right. Like, they need an infusion, and I don't think it comes at the skill positions. The skill positions are satisfactory as far as I'm concerned. But you need elite talent on that line. The other thing is, what position outside of quarterback makes a very good player elite, or can make a very good player at a different position elite? It's O line. O line makes everybody better, right? DK can't even get into a deep pattern if we have no protection.
Right.
The running backs can't even run. They get hit in the backfield because there's no hole, right? The quarterback can't function if he has no time. So why
Yeah.
wouldn't you invest in the position that can impact everybody else? I don't
Yep.
know. It's going to make me crazy. If they don't, it's going to make me crazy.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you there. Now I'll give JSN this. To your point, JSN sort of had his ascension, the beginning of it, when DK went out.
Mhm.
And so that was my question too for the longest. But
Shoot.
I think he was able to, DK was out for a little minute. I think we didn't see that
He
consistency
had
playing.
he had hella targets though, didn't he? He had hella targets when DK went down.
Well, who else was getting the ball? No
I'm
offense to
just saying,
Tyler.
you throw the ball to me 20 times, I might catch him 6, 7, 8 times,
I
put
don't
up
think
some
that's true.
yards.
I
You
think
know,
there are plenty of wide receivers out here in these streets that targets would mean nothing. Like Clinton Johnson. Like we can talk about dudes who targets don't mean anything, man. I mean, yes, I'm not gonna say that pretend like targets did not help JSN's
right?
ascension, but I do think that he brings something that's a little unique to the game. I think his ability to
Sure,
run routes. I think his
sure,
technicians. Right. I think there are plenty of things that you can't easily duplicate. Now,
sure.
I can't say that about anybody else on the wide receiver room, like Jake Bow or what have you. But I will give JSN that. But I think this season will be a true test because I do think teams will be more intentional about scouting for him and really
Yes,
targeting him. And so
I
how
agree.
he responds to that will tell us a lot about is he blue chip or was he bluish? Like was it looking a little shade, looking a little false, a little fraudulent,
Right,
if you will.
right. Well, and we're gonna need more. Speaking of wide receivers, we have a real estate agent as our number three. And so we need some. We're gonna need an infusion of some talent there too. As far as I'm saying, played like a real estate agent last year. He's just getting older. We need a little bit more at that position. I think moving forward as well. We gonna talk
I
about
would
the
agree. I would
we
agree.
gonna
Now,
talk about
Will,
the
I
quarterback
think now
yet?
Tyler made something. He made an interesting point. We haven't gotten a chance to talk about this. That one, he does want to continue to play,
Mm-hmm.
but also that
Play
he
what? Real
felt like
estate or
he
football?
sacrificed football. He is continuing to play football. He says, and and he is he talked about the sacrifice that he makes. So
Mm,
I'm pretty sure that he wasn't happy with his role, and I think he probably would lean on Grub for that. I might be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on that because while I do think his production he's not the same guy. I don't think there's any question. I do think he could have been more productive. It seemed like Grubb struggled to feature more than one guy at a time because then when JSN got going, then DK kind of fell off the map too.
that's
So
true.
I
That's
can
true.
sort of I think Tyler was better than what he showed on the field last season for sure. Um, but I also think either way, as much as I love Tyler, I agree with you. I'd love to see just some juice,
Yeah.
something
Well,
different infused.
if we're going, the thing is too is if we're going, we're talking about resources and they're not too far away from that cap, then do you want to pay Tyler what he's going to want as a
Right.
veteran? Right? He'll take a pay cut, but it's going to be a haircut. It's not going to be, it's not going to be a full like veteran minimum sort of situation. I don't think.
Right.
And so, or do you want to pay him six or whatever it is that he's going to want? Or would you rather take that, invest that in the offensive line and go draft a receiver in the second or third round? And now you've got more juice at that position. You might be more raw, but you're more of a threat, right? And I think that role that JSN plays as the technician in the short and intermediate allows you to be creative with the next wide receiver you bring in. And so I don't know, for if it was up to me, I'd rather spend a little draft capital, keep that salary down, and then use that salary that Lockett would have gotten to put it right back into that offensive line. But
Yeah,
we'll see what
completely
they do.
agree.
We'll see
Completely
what they do.
agree. I thought this was interesting too. Before we get to our clips, the additions of Rick Dennison,
Mm-hmm.
Super Bowl winning coach. I love having that kind of experience in the room on the offensive side, like basically the Leslie
Mm-hmm.
Frazier of the offense.
Mm-hmm.
Really love that move. Also love the move of getting Justin Alton, who was an offense who worked with Klint Kubiak when he was with the Broncos. I believe the positions have changed though. Initially, he was announced he would be the run game specialist or coordinator, run game, yeah, something like that. But I think they adjusted those because I believe that Dennison now is sort of assuming that role, and they're going to have Alton be, in a different position. But in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, I wanted to talk about this because I think that this coaching staff is probably the best coaching staff that we've had since probably. I know Darren Bubble is going to take a lot of crap for the last Super Bowl, but I look back to then. I look back to
Pump the
then. Or
brakes. Hey, you better pump the brakes because we ain't seen nothing from him yet. We ain't seen nothing from him.
from
How was
what?
it the best from the guys we're bringing in?
In terms of the coaches that you have on the staff, not just your head coach, not just I think very highly of Mike McDonald. Two, I think the experience, no matter what you think of Klint Kubiak, I think the experience that he has behind him and the guys in the room who can really help create answers. I think you got guys who have probably the best resumes that they've had. Looking at the coaches that were under Pete and the assistants that were under Pete, nobody wanted them dudes. Literally, like no,
They wanted
no one had a
Desai.
resume that was impressive. No one had anything
Hey,
that would
Desai
make
was good. I like Desai.
Desai was good. Desai was literally one of the only guys who got like poached later on,
What
and
about Dave
then he
Canales? Dave
branched out.
Canales is a head coach now.
You saw what?
Dave Canales is a head coach now, right? In Carolina. But
Dave
I get
Canales is
what you're
a head
saying.
coach, but he was a quarterbacks coach at that time, and frankly, while I think he did have a good influence on Gino, I think outside of that, it's because I'm looking at both sides of the ball. You got Leslie Frazier, you got Rick Dennison, I'm talking about the entire coaching staff and the
Mhm,
resumes of those dudes.
mhm,
There has been nothing like it. Now, obviously, they've got to put together a good product on the field. So,
mhm.
but in terms of the experience and youth, right? Like that match, you got quite a bit of innovation happening. A lot of these coaches are newer, but they still have that experience that you love to see. You're not sacrificing one for the other.
Yeah.
That's to me what makes this the best and most well-rounded coaching staff that I can remember in recent years. I mean, we can debate the Super Bowl. Obviously, you can debate Super Bowl years and things like that, but
Mhm.
it's been a long time.
I don't care how long the resume is. I don't. I'm one of those. Like I'm happy to take chances on guys who don't have, Grubb didn't work out, but I think the process there was fine for me. I don't the length of the resume doesn't matter. What matters to me is, did you last for 1 year in three different offensive coordinator positions, and this is number four, right? That's the part. That's a long resume. That's not a good resume for me. So, Dennison and the other guys they're bringing in, I think I get it. And you had to bring somebody in, and I think the idea that we needed some experience in the room, I think is the right idea. I think that is the. I'm not knocking that. That is the right idea. I worry that I wonder what Jake Pete's voice is going to be in the room
I believe
with a
he's
lot of
past
other.
game.
What's that?
I think he's past game coordinator. I want to say,
Okay.
yeah.
I hope that I want him to have a strong influence on this offense because I think he has really good ideas and I like the youthful energy. To me, we can argue the offense back and forth, but the reality is, again, getting back to what we just talked about, if the offensive line isn't decent to good, none of it matters, right? You could bring in a brilliant offensive coordinator, and I don't show me the last offense without a Hall of Fame quarterback, Hall of Fame caliber quarterback that was good without a decent offensive line.
Shane Waldron's actually ended up being like top 10 for most of the
I
year.
don't. Okay, I don't care
With
about
the
top
crap
10. I care
offensive
about
line.
were they good numerically? That team could. I could twist baseball numbers all day long too. Like you can say it was a top 10 offense. I don't care if the offense didn't seem to be productive and hold on to the ball and not turn the ball over and all the things that you want the offense to do. You can put up big numbers if your defense is bad and you're just going up and down the field because you're chucking it around because you're coming from behind, right? You can put up fewer yards and run the ball but control the ball and not give the ball to the other team and have a 14th ranked offense but still be more efficient and more productive. So where they rank in terms of points scored or any of those things for me, while it matters, it's not the end all. And I think Waldron's tenure here is gets a little bit of shine because of the numbers that it put up, but I don't think that it was a good offense per se, in my opinion.
Well, I would also say now they're all flawed offenses, right? Every offense that we've had in the past have all had some flaw.
Big ones.
a lot of that has to do with the offensive line. That there's no doubt about that. Some of it
Right.
also had to do with, I think, coaching. So I guess I'm a bigger advocate for coaching and development than maybe you are. I really believe in the power of coaching and how that can make a difference.
I think it's incredibly important. I think it's incredibly important, but you have to have an identity and you have to have synergy amongst that staff, right? And obviously there was no synergy between Grubb and McDonald.
Yeah, for
If
sure.
but Kubiak has a step up on Grubb, if he just comes in and gets along with McDonald and they see things the same way.
Yeah,
And the
for sure.
Seahawks, everybody needs to get fired if they didn't bring an offensive coordinator that's going to go along with what Coach McDonald wants the second time around. You
For
can't
sure.
make that mistake again.
For sure. Definitely agree. Yeah. Yep. So speaking of identity, you touched on a couple of things that I want to get into here with these clips. So I'm gonna play some clip Kubiak sound, go through this first clip. He was sort of asked about what it was like working with injuries. And I've watched a lot of reactions to this press conference. Nobody's really brought up this clip. To me, something stood out that was a little bit different. You may or may not have anything regards to this clip, but I thought it was actually pretty interesting. So this is Klint Kubiak asked about what it was like. Essentially, I think the question that Stacy from Bump and Stacy framed it is that, with one hand tied behind your back,
Right.
um,
Because the Saints,
with all the
so the
injuries.
background is the Saints had everybody injured, right? Chris
Right,
Olave was out, Derek Carr was out, you had Spencer Rattler starting, so your number one receiver was out. Kamara was basically carrying the load. Their
correct.
offensive line was horrible.
Right.
They just had, I think Taysom Hill was hurt for a while. They
Hmm.
just were completely decimated. Imagine no DK and imagine no Geno for a stretch, and you just fed the ball to K9 40 times a game, right? That was kind of what they did.
Yeah, I don't think they even think they had the running backs were injured at times too. It was
Right.
insane. It was like uh, no one here would know, but
Infirmary.
the
Mm-hmm.
Memphis Grizzlies had a year from hell like that, and that's the team I follow where literally every single like person was injured, and I think the Saints basically had that come their way for
Mm-hmm.
sure. So that's the
Mm-hmm.
context to this question. Clint Kubiak, how was it for him? What were the challenges behind him navigating all those injuries last season?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's part of football. That's part of the job in the NFL is dealing with that. And no matter where you go, it doesn't matter. You're going to have injuries. You're going to have guys step up. So I thought it was really, I enjoyed it because you got to coach so many young players that were coming into your roster. Young quarterback, young wide receivers. When guys are coming in and out of the roster, you got to find the positives in that. And that's, as a coach, as a teacher, and having the young guys have success, that's really fun.
Okay. So for me, one of the things I loved a couple things about that quote. One, the question was framed in really such a negative light, basically giving him a lot of sympathy. And he basically said, like, I actually enjoyed a lot of it. I think that's important because of this number one reason. The Seahawks could do everything that we, the fan base, wants them to do on that offensive line. And if they get hit with injuries, then they get hit with injuries. I love having a coach that knows how to navigate those situations and basically make lemonade out of lemons. I like having a coach that knows how to navigate in those situations and I mean, he just made it seem like it was another casual day. He's like, well, that happens in the NFL. I mean, what he had happen to him doesn't normally happen in the NFL, but he just sort of took that. I think I expected him to be like, well, you just sort of overcome those things, but he really didn't take that route. For him to say he enjoyed that, that stood out to me along with his teaching comment. I think he meant it because he spoke to the teaching aspect that comes with developing those younger guys. And like we were talking about before, John Schneider, he may not do what we want him to do. He might be banking on development of some of these younger guys, and we can argue whether that's the right strategy or not. But it to me, it is good to, if that is your plan, then you've got to get someone in here that has at least been able to navigate some of the tougher situations that you can deal with and overcome them. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of my takeaway.
My takeaway listening to that is that he has a good PR coach because I think that I don't know. It's like you ask me a question and I know I'm on the spot, and I could give you whatever answer you wanted to hear, right? And it's not to say that he's not genuine in saying that. I don't know enough about him, but it's what I would say. Hey, you know what? Next man up. We had some young players. They were really fun to coach, really interesting. We rode Kamara really hard. But every situation presents itself differently. If you have injuries somewhere else, sometimes you might have to throw the ball a lot more. We happen to give the ball to our running back. Sometimes it might be receiver, but you do what you got to do. I would say like your years in the NFL are limited. Your years as a coordinator are limited. You got to do the best every single year. Your owner and your fans expect you to be great every single year. So that stuff happens. We know it's a violent game. People get hurt all the time. We go into the season knowing this is going to happen. So you know what? You do the best with what you got, and you try to enjoy the ride. And I feel like we did a really good job in New Orleans, and we're going to do the best job we can in Seattle to coach up those young players if the same thing happens, right? That was off the cuff. That was just me being random and silly. I'm not saying that what he's saying isn't genuine. I'm just saying when you're new to a job, you're going to go in there and say what you need to say and survive and get people behind you. So my takeaway is that I still want to see it, right? For me, it's more about what we see when the season gets started. The other thing is with most any team, yes, you need to like capitalize on the opportunities for the young players like we did with Laumea and your boy at right tackle last year. But we're not winning anything if that happens to us, right? We're not winning the Super Bowl. And if the Super Bowl is the goal, we're going to have to keep people healthy.
No, like I said, well, our goal is to like win a playoff game for one. Like
right?
that's really what we are. We're just trying to win a playoff game.
Yes, realistically, yes.
Yeah,
Until we sign Trey
really
Smith, that's where we are. I agree.
Yeah, that's where we're at. We just want to start with the basics and
Right.
understand our timeline. I don't know. I think it's ironic if you're gonna say if and most people would say they would be correct. He's like the most boring guy in the world, and I also say he's got a PR coach. Like those typically aren't the same.
No, but you can be the PR coach isn't trying to
man.
make you likable and engaging. The PR coach is making sure you don't screw up. What I'm saying is, yeah, dude is hella boring, but I think he was trying to say the right thing, or he said the right thing, and that's why I made the PR coach comment. I think you can be super boring and have a PR coach, right? Alex Rodriguez was that way for the Mariners. When he was young, he used to make me crazy because he would always say the most boring right thing. And he didn't even mean it, but he said it because he was coached to say it, right? And it seems so disingenuous. And so you can be boring and say the right thing all the time. Yeah, I'm not saying that's what Kubiak is doing, but that's how it came across to me.
All right, next clip.
I just don't like the dude. Hey, I hope I'm proven wrong. I'm coming at it hella biased.
You gotta have something. You gotta have an identity, right? So ideally,
wait.
Well, I think it is.
Gotta give context. All right, so he was asked specifically about the outside zone. Why is that sort of something that he leans on? Given all the other schemes out there, what sticks out to him as a winning formula, essentially?
Yeah, well, I think it is. You gotta have something. You gotta have an identity, right? So ideally, we want our identity to be able to team that can run the football versus an 8-man front, and a team that can play action, a team that can move the pocket, a team that can, push the ball down the field on first and second down and be explosive. So that's a starting point for us. Now, what we become is up to our players. We'll start with a basic installation, and then we got to find out what our guys do well, and what we're running on Sunday might be totally different. It's all based off of what they do well. So I think it'll be really important that we get together in April with our guys and start laying a foundation of what I think we can be, and then you always got to pivot to what the guys do well. Yeah, well, I think.
I think it's crazy that you fell asleep immediately after it said we got to have an identity, which is something that you've been saying we need for like 3 years now.
I apologize. I just got to we have before I fell asleep. I didn't hear the identity part.
Yeah, I mean that's why that clip stood out to me, is because how many times have we got on this episode and we said, what is this offense? Like, in fact, I would say that was probably one of the bigger pitfalls of the Shane Waldron offense. It was just stuff thrown in a sink, and there was nothing that the team did well. There was no go-to plays. There was nothing that they could really, hang their hat on. There was nothing.
Right.
And I would say the same thing ended up happening with Ryan Grubb as well. And so to
Mhm.
me, to have a guy who knows his identity and understands while having an identity, the importance of being able to balance that still with your personnel, saying this is who we want to be in an ideal box, but I understand that the guys may not be able to do that well, and so we're going to have to make adjustments as we go along. I think it's important because I think I've heard questions from previous offensive coordinators before, and it wasn't specific. It wasn't that clear. It wasn't. The word clarity comes to mind in terms
Mhm.
of what to expect with him, which is something that Mac McDonald is obviously very big on. So
Mhm.
to me, I think that's a step in the right direction off the bat.
I agree. I agree. I think obviously we talked about it ad nauseum from the. I think from the very first podcast we did together about how the Seahawks needed an identity, specifically on the offensive side of the ball, and we couldn't say what it was. I
Yeah,
agree that from that point until now, you can't really say what the team is. I also think that your talent or your lack of talent in the Seahawks case dictates or has dictated the lack of identity. I think that they at times have wanted to run the ball more, certainly under Pete Carroll, and they couldn't because they didn't have the offensive line to do so, right? And so I do appreciate the fact that he said he's willing to flex, or he understands you may want your identity to be one thing, but it may not be that thing because that's not what the players do well. That's a step in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. I would also say that John Schneider and Mike McDonald would be doing a huge disservice to the fan base and to themselves if they didn't demand their next offensive coordinator to have a very strong identity walking in the door, right? Because of how bad it was last year. I'm saying in the interview process, I would ask each and every person in the interview process, each and every interviewee, I would start with what is your belief system or your values as far as an offense goes, and what is the identity of your offense, right? What is this offense going to look like specifically with the players we have now? Or in 2 to 3 years, if we were to invest in the offensive line, what type of offense are you running? Explain it to me. And let's break it down in detail with each and every player how they fit. If you don't ask that, like in question 1, 2, or 3 in a interview of an offensive coordinator, given the lack of identity the last couple of years, it's malpractice. Again, I'll use that word. So the fact that he came in saying those things is good. I think that's a huge positive, and I am excited to see them have an identity. And I also think when things don't work, sometimes you have to stick with it. Sometimes you have to continue teaching it and making it a part of who you are. If he's an outside zone guy, I want to see them run outside zone. It's not always going to work, but you've got to continue to teach it and run it in order for it to be effective.
yeah. No, definitely agree. Definitely agree with those points. For the most part, I feel like, I mean, given the candidates that they interviewed, I think you can. I mean, every coach is going to have an answer to that question. Um, but I'm looking for specifics at this point because that's all we can. I mean, we've got generalized ideas, and we've gotten plenty of generalized ideas
Mm-hmm.
over the years.
Right.
And what I'm looking for is that clarity. And so for me, I think that's the difference. I'm not, and I think that will probably stand out to him as to why he ultimately probably ended up getting a job over some of the other guys who just, would be open minded and and maybe have a general idea, but it's one thing to have an idea, but if you haven't executed it before, in my opinion, I think things can change quickly, which we saw. I mean, because Ryan Grubb had an answer
Well,
to
I
what
would also say, though, how do you ever get that chance? How do you ever get a chance to show that you're great if you don't have an opportunity to show? That's
Well,
that's my Hank
we're gonna
Fraley
find
thing.
out. I mean, the guys who, what was interesting in my opinion is some of the other, I guess, top candidates ended up kind of still not being given completely the chance. They got promoted, but like they still weren't. No one saw them. It's not like another team snagged them. Basically, is what I'm saying.
It depends on what you want, though. Like I think like a Hank Fraley's not is in a good situation with Detroit, right? And so
They
he
need an
may
offensive
want,
coordinator, don't they?
yeah, but he may want to pick and choose what he wants to do as well. So let's say he would say, I would want to be the offensive coordinator for the Seahawks. I'd want to be the offensive coordinator for the Lions, but I'm good as the offensive line coach for the Lions if those two jobs don't materialize for me, right? Like you can see that's like what Ben Johnson did. He waited forever to take the job with the Bears, and he was able to pick and choose because he was comfortable where he was at. So I don't know if that's a reflection on the caliber of those guys as much as maybe the jobs that were available. I think you are right to at least a certain extent. You might be completely right, but that's just kind of I'm trying to look at it from multiple ways.
Fair enough. All right. I think the last immediate clip for sure that I want to talk. I know. So there's a clip that I have that where he sort of talks about a little bit more about that offense, the specifics of that. But the quote that everybody is talking about because I guess Gino is what a lightning rod for commentary. His comments on he was asked about the differences between coaching Geno Smith, coaching Kirk Cousins. You know, basically they have some similarities to their game to some extent.
Sure.
And this was his response.
Yeah, two excellent players, and I think Gino is his own man in a great way. Like Gino is a very aggressive player, have a lot of production. Obviously, he's been doing it for a long time. He's overcome a lot in his career. I have a lot of respect for Gino. Was a huge draw to come here and be able to get to coach him, you know, alongside Andrew Janocko. So we have high expectations for him. We're going to push Gino and get the best out of him, and we'll do that by pushing his teammates as well. It's not just his show; it's a team thing, and he's got to be the head of that. Yeah.
All right, so this is controversial because a lot of the fan base does not want Gino. Frankly, they are hoping that Gino walks. They are hoping that I don't know, cut him, trade him. Some people are like, just get him off my team, essentially. Even though he's under
Right, who are
contract.
you going to get? Sam Darnold? Like,
I think that's a conversation worth having. But
Shador Sanders, Cam Ward, like, man.
we need to speak to the folks who are listening, who are team get Gino off my team. To me,
Gino is not the
that
problem.
quote says that Gino is going to be extended, and I think there was a question about it in the offseason. I think this quote solidifies that this offensive coordinator has built his system with Gino in mind, and they have no intentions, especially given that he's actually under contract, of changing that right now. But to the guys who genuinely would say yes, go get Sam Darnold, go give me Sam Darnold instead. What would you say to those people who would say give me Justin Fields, who would say give me any of those other guys instead of Geno Smith? What would you say to them?
So two things. One is Geno Smith is the best quarterback available to the Seattle Seahawks in 2025. Hard stop. None of those names you named, Justin Fields, Sam Darnold, any of the top quarterbacks in the draft, are going to perform even at like 80% of the level that Geno Smith is capable of playing. Period. I like Fields. I think Fields is interesting. I think Fields has to be in a run-focused offense, right? Like a heavily run-focused offense. If you built an offense like Baltimore did under with Coach Nolan as their offensive coordinator when Lamar Smith was younger, then sure, Fields might work. But as a pure passer, no. And he's probably the most talented ones out of the ones you named. Here's the thing. I don't know that Klint Kubiak had the say or the voice as to whether Geno Smith was going to stay or not. My guess is that was a Mike McDonald, John Schneider decision. And they said to the people who were interviewing, Geno Smith is going to be your quarterback for the next couple of years. What will you do with him? Right. And I do think that you can compare Cousins to Geno Smith. And as much as I don't like Kirk Cousins, look at his numbers. He's put up some enormous seasons, right, in the past 5 or so. So I think, again, and this is my gut, I don't know that I'm right, but this is what my gut says, is Geno Smith is going to be your quarterback. You got the job knowing Geno Smith was going to be your quarterback. So what you're going to say in an interview, again, is going to be, you know what, like, he's talented. He's very good. We're going to do everything we can to make him better, get the best out of him, right? He's going to have to work with we're going to have to work with the people around him, but we believe in him. We think he fits. Does he fit? I think he really does. Because under center, they run a lot of that outside zone. They run a lot of the the play action off the outside zone where the quarterback is now rolling the other way, little not naked bootleg, but little rolling back to the pocket sort of thing. They move off platform quite a bit. Gino has the mobility to do that. I think he makes a lot of sense in what I've seen in the Kubiak offenses, a ton of sense. But I don't know that I care whether it's a chicken or the egg thing. I don't really care if it's the chicken or the egg first. If it's Kubiak saying, I love Geno Smith, I want this job in large part because you have Geno Smith, or if it was Schneider and McDonald saying, Geno Smith is your quarterback, what will you do? Don't care. I think it's a good fit. It's a good marriage as far as I'm concerned. But I am glad that he's enthusiastic about what Geno Smith can look like in his offense. It's a good
Yeah.
thing.
My only counter for you is that in this particular instance, I would agree with you completely if this is a question about how do you see Geno Smith fitting in this offense. I think that would be like a dead giveaway. You know what I mean? Like you pretty much got to hype the guy up at that point,
Sure.
or well, I don't know. They didn't do that at all last season. So last off season, it was an off season of nobody wants to commit to Geno. Why not? Like no one is complimentary of Geno. But so I don't know. That's a dead giveaway. But this was a question of comparison, and frankly, he could have just directly answered the question and didn't have to elaborate on his enthusiasm for working with Geno, which I think is what makes this quote stand out versus a just what do you think about working with Geno in this offense question,
Right.
because it was sort of, I'm not going to say it was given. Now I agree with you on, chicken or the egg. What does it matter? I would lean more towards that he was genuine in saying Gino was a draw
I hope
because
so.
it was volunteered. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
you didn't have to. That
Well,
wasn't the
and
question.
to Kubiak's credit, say he isn't or wasn't like 100% bought into Geno Smith. How do you get Geno Smith to buy into you as a leader, right? How do you motivate your team to play for you and believe in what you're saying? You come in the beginning and you support them positively. There's
Yeah.
a lot. They've already done a lot of good things. So if even if he didn't believe it,
Hmm.
I like that about him as a leader, that he comes out and really is behind Geno Smith from the beginning. I think that's the right approach. And I think, as a coach or as a leader, you start with that. You start with being positive and supporting and see how high they can go with being their fan or their supporter, right? It would be a warning sign for me if he came in negative and was, like, well, we'll see, I don't really know what we have here, but it's going to be a competition and whatnot. No, he was,
That's what they did last year. It is what they did last year.
and you know what? In hindsight, that was a huge mistake because
Yeah.
he was much better than that, and they could have looked at film
Yeah.
and just looked at those two quarterbacks on the practice field for one day, and they could have said, all right, no more of that narrative, right? Get rid of that thing. That thing needs to go in the dumpster
Yeah.
because that's not what's going on here. So yeah, I think that's a positive too. I think there are some things that he's doing that are savvy, meaning Coach Kubiak, in terms of saying the right thing, in terms of supporting Gino in that way publicly, that is going to set him up to walk in the door being well received.
Yeah.
And I do like that about him. Maybe he's more savvy. He has to be savvy as a person, right? His dad was a head coach. He's got to understand the inner workings of an organization in that way. My questions have more to do with why has he failed in other stops, but we talked about that a lot already.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. My other takeaway from hearing, a lot of his interviews, and I'm a geek, so I enjoy this stuff. I really don't care if I
Mm-hmm.
don't really care if you didn't change a single monotone, which he probably didn't. But I'm cool with all of that as long I'm just like thirsty for football knowledge.
Sure,
So,
for sure.
uh, but I did hear him, and I was like, yeah, he's probably like, even if they have like a top three offense, like he doesn't have the personality I think to get poached
Right,
after a year. So
right.
I think he's gonna have to prove it. Like it's sort of like how Kyle Shanahan was. Like Kyle Shanahan doesn't. I mean, his personality to me is just
Yeah, he's
as
boring milk toast. He's boring
yeah,
too.
it's just as
Yeah,
dead as a doorknob in
yeah.
terms of enthusiasm and how he approaches press conferences and stuff like that. I really don't know how
Right.
people listen to him so regularly, but you know, I think it's a similar path where when you're that dull, you're gonna have to prove it. And so I
Right.
like the prospect of having some continuity, probably for at least 2 years. I mean, even if they had, like I said, you have to have it a minimum of two. I think in
Right.
order to be seriously, a real possibility that he could be poached from
Right.
the staff.
Well,
So
and
that's exciting.
honestly, he's been a head coach or he's been an offensive coordinator, and this will be stop number 4, right?
Yep.
And I think that if he succeeds here, he's going to want to stay for a while, to your
Yep.
point. And I don't think he's moving from Seattle um, for another offensive coordinator position. If he's going to leave, he's going to be a superstar over the next 2 or 3 years, and he's going to end up being a head coach somewhere else, right? That's how he
Exactly.
leaves.
Yep.
Unless things go so south or he gets in a fight with somebody or, something crazy like that. But he don't seem like the fighting type to me. But, I think that I think you're right that there is potential for continuity here if he
Hmm.
does do a good job, for
Yep.
sure.
Which is a
Um,
positive for that O line because they
I
need some
I think
bad.
so. I think so.
Yeah. So that was pretty much all my takeaways in terms of some of the things that have been talked about, some of the things that have been said. There's been a lot of conversation about DK as well. My
Yep.
takeaways about how things were with Gino and sort of that press conference that was confirmed. That was also confirmed that DK is the same boat. To me, it seems
Yep.
like he talked about explosiveness, which I will give him credit over. Kyle Shanahan sort of lives in the middle, if you will, in that intermediate. He's not really a bombs away kind of play caller for the most part.
Right.
It
Right.
seems like Kubiak might be more in line with that because he talked about that and he basically, I mean, if you're going to have that be the case, you need DK in order
Hmm.
to make that a reality. So
Hmm.
we talked about earlier, I was probably more fine than maybe I was early in the year had they decided to trade DK, honestly, or I I would have been given. I still don't think he's going to live up to the contract that he's about to get.
Sure.
But also, I understand that, frankly, it's unfortunate timing, but the wide receiver draft class isn't nearly as, high as it's been in the
Hmm.
past. So I don't
Hmm.
feel as comfortable saying it as I would have in years past. Hey, just draft someone else instead, and that guy can be a day one, starter for you to sort of take that DK role. They don't
Right.
have that. So kind
Right.
of kind of like with Gino, you're kind of stuck.
Yep.
Sucks, but you're
Well,
kind of stuck.
I don't know. I think DK's value, as we've said, DK's value is not just his production in terms of receptions
Yeah,
and
yeah,
yards and touchdowns, right? And I think he's really underrated. I can't stand the rounded off routes and him leaving Gino out to dry, but I think he is underrated, and I think he's the kind of player where we talked about this when he was injured. Although JSN had a good game, he's the kind of guy that you don't appreciate till he's gone,
hmm,
right? And him being able to take the top off of defense is hugely valuable. So I don't know. Then again, we see a Brian Thomas get drafted in the middle of the first round by Jacksonville
yeah,
and be a superstar from day one, right? We
yeah,
see Malik Neighbors come out and be, top 5 wide receiver in football from a talent standpoint and have incredible production year one, right out the gate. So yeah, I don't know. If they had an offensive line that was good and they didn't have to invest a bunch of resources in it, I could see DK being expendable and replacing him with someone younger.
yeah,
But not with this offensive line. They don't. And if you don't bring him back, you better trade him and not let him go in free agency and get nothing back for him.
yeah. I don't think DK is playing on I don't think he's playing without an extension. So I think that's kind of
Like
where you're at.
trade him or sign him, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that's the position that they're going to be in. I think if you have the option of letting him play at that last year, I definitely do that. But I don't think you're going to have that
I
option.
think
Didn't
they'll.
he
I
sit
think
out
they'll sign
before?
him. I think they sign him.
They said, yeah, I think they signed him too.
I think
Now,
they
I
sign
will
him.
say this: if they sign him, keep him this year, I definitely wouldn't be opposed to drafting, over the like I'm not committed necessarily to DK staying in Seattle over the
No.
length of that contract. And if
Mm-mm.
they can find another opportunity to get better, it would well, not even well, yeah, because to get better because I love DK, but he's a flawed player. If they
Right.
have an opportunity to do something different, to go in a different direction, I would be for that, and I probably will be rooting for that, frankly, because I don't think it's a great use of resources, but I also understand how big of a step you may be taking back if you don't extend him right now.
Right. I
Yeah.
agree.
Okay. I think that's all I got, man. Anything
Another
else you
spicy
want to touch
one,
on?
huh? Nah, not really. I'm getting excited for the draft. I think, seeing obviously mock drafts we don't never know what John Schneider's going to do, but seeing all the mocks give the Seahawks, except for a couple, giving them offensive linemen is a good thing, right? And I want to see this whole offseason to me is infusing that position with talent, whether it's free agency or the draft. That's everything else. I think is good. I think we can play at an elite level at on offense and defense if that happens. So that's the thing I'm focused on. And then once the season gets started, the off season gets started. What are these coaches teaching, right? And do we have the right staff in place? But for now, it's kind of wait and see, learn about the draft pool quite a bit, and go from there. But I don't know. I'll come around eventually. I guess is my last thing. I just I don't I wanted to see something different. I made that clear. But if this does work and if a steady hand like a Kubiak makes sense, and if they're going to get under center, they're going to run the ball more with a very strong identity, then that's my dude. That works. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
I think you're gonna be singing a whole different tune by the time we get into the season.
If I wake up in enough time to be able to watch them play, let's just hope he doesn't talk anymore. Man, that dude was boring. That dude was hella boring.
I enjoy the Nuggets. I enjoy any Nuggets I can get
Look,
around this
Candace,
time of year.
I'm a baseball nut, right? Baseball is my thing. And most people, when you tell them you love baseball, they're like, that is the most boring
It is.
sport
It
of
is.
all time. And I love all the books with all the stats in my database. And so I get boring. I get someone being monotone with there being content within it, right? It's not to me about whether that's part of it. But the majority of it is that he was just. It sounded to me like there was some what they call the AI. They said, "Give me the offensive coordinator who's going to say the right thing." What would a AI offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks say before the season started when he was getting introduced? And that's what he sounded like to me.
I gotta tell you, is it possible that is he just AI generated, or was he just actually the best fit for the Seahawks? Because you keep saying that like he's saying the wrong things, and to me, it proves the point of exactly why he was hired. Because I mean,
Yeah, I guess I'm more of a skeptic of AI. I don't know.
maybe so, man. I don't think that's as bad of a thing as you made it out to be. It was an insult, but to his personality deserves.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see.
About that.
We'll see. If he can run that outside zone, he's good with me.
I think he'll be able to do that. I think he'll be fine. You're gonna have a rough off season. It's all right.
So.
Like you're gonna have a rough off season, but it'll be okay.
Good to see you.
Absolutely, Tino. Tell the people where they can find you.
Tino Jr. 20 on Blue Sky, talking baseball, getting ready for this baseball season.
Absolutely. Be sure to follow the show at 60 on Blue Sky. If you're listening on YouTube, thanks for listening to the end. Like and subscribe. Please continue to support us. In the meantime, that's it. That's all the time we have for today. That's all. We're out. And as always,
Mohawks.